Use that for town.
Call to order the Town Board Work Session for August 5th, 2019, the time being 6:05 p.m. Goal of this work session is to have the Town Board receive information on topics of town business from Town Manager, Town Attorney, and other town staff in order to exchange ideas and opinions regarding these topics. So, members of the public in attendance are asked to be recognized by the mayor before participating in any discussions of the board, and typically during a work session, we do not have discussions from the attendants, but we will play that by ear as we get into the conversation this evening. So this evening, our first item on the agenda is meet the board and new employees. So, Mr. Hale, are you going to do us the honors?
Sure thing, Your Honor. So first, I guess we'll just have Corinne introduce her new staff person.
Hi, good evening, board. I'd like to introduce you to our amazing new IT person, Gwen. She accepted the IT intern role here, and she's doing a great job. She's jumping right in. She's doing very good things already, helping with some auditing and things I haven't even mentioned to her. So it's really, really a pleasure to have an employee who is like that, willing to do what it takes. She's also going to UNC for her IT degree, much like another employee that we have, Ethan. So they're both going to complete their degrees here, hopefully within the next year. So Gwen, do you have?
Hi, yeah, I'm Gwen. I'm studying business with an emphasis in computer information systems, and I kind of stumbled across this internship, and I was super excited to work here because my family lives here, and I love the town of Windsor, and I love technology, so I'm really passionate about it, and I'm excited to be working with all of you in the town. Yeah, thank you.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
And then next we have Eric Lucas to introduce three folks.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. First up tonight is Leroy McDade. Come on up, Leroy. He recently moved here from El Paso, and he works evenings as a facility specialist at the rec center, doing a lot of maintenance and cleaning. So he's been a great asset to our team in the last month or so. So I want to introduce Leroy.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to have a job, and I'll tell you, I haven't been in a more friendly city than this. Everybody will take time to talk to you and appreciate you, and it's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Welcome. Thank you, and welcome.
Next up is Elisa Hayworth. She also is a facility specialist, recently started with us at the rec center, works nights with Leroy. She's also doing a fabulous job. I wanted to introduce you to her tonight.
Hi, I'm Elisa. I've lived in Windsor, let's see, this month will be 19 years. So raised my kiddos here. They went through the school district and they're off, but I have no interest in leaving Windsor, so yay. That's it.
And last but not least is Terry Zimmer. He's a guest service coordinator at the front desk of the rec center. He recently moved his family here from Omaha, Nebraska. We did hire him under one condition. He is not a Cornhusker fan.
I find that hard to believe.
Hi, I'm also pleased to be here. Yeah, I'm not a Husker fan.
Oh,
We spent about 25 years in Omaha and cheered for whoever was playing the Huskers. I'm originally from North Dakota, and I grew up in a small community like Windsor, and it's really nice to come back to a community like this where there's not a lot of traffic and you can get around anywhere in 5 minutes. I have a couple kids. My wife can work from anywhere we live, and so we decided to move to Windsor, or we kind of followed our daughter to, she's going to go to grad school at Colorado State, and we have a son that's going to be a junior in college.
I thought you were going to say the condition was he couldn't fraternize with Will Reinemeyer.
or you'd have to be. It'll be okay. Or you'd have to be a Steelers fan.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, so then we're going to move on to our second item this evening is the request to hire a patrol officer. Mr. Hale.
All right, thank you, Mayor, Town Board. So the town had a relatively new community service officer resign after a pretty short stint with us. We have not replaced that position. We concurrently have had 3 officers that are out for different reasons. I attached a memo from Chief Klimek in your packet. Sorry, I attached the wrong one. So I gave you table settings, so that gives a little background from Chief, but as you can see, we're definitely short on people power at the police department. So his request to me, and my request to you, is that instead of hiring the CSO position, we hire a new patrol position this year. This would be creating a new job. I think with vacancy savings this year, with the budget, we've saved about $78,000. The cost, the difference between the CSU and the patrol officer will be about $4,200 to this year's budget. But if you look at the equipment that we have to pay for with the new employee, like a new CSO, that's about $5,000 in equipment, and there's no guarantee that we could use that same equipment for the next person because depending on their size and their gender, it may be completely different. So I think the budget impact this year is basically a wash. And then I also just want to point out that when I'm looking at staff requests, I intend to bring at least 1 new patrol officer position to the board for 2020. There's going to probably be more than that, but there's going to be at least 1. And so, you know, if we create this position, that'll just be reflected in the 2020 budget request, and it'll just come a little bit early. But again, I don't think that there's really a real budget impact this year to create that position. And then I'm here to answer any questions that the board has.
Okay, are there any questions? Mr. Sosowski?
Yeah, Shane, just to clarify, if we add the position this year, it's really filling one of the positions that would have been in the 2020 request,
Yes, sir.
right? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah, so it would just come a few months early.
Right.
And normally we wouldn't do this mid-year, but I think given how shorthanded we are in the police department right now, it did make sense to give them a little relief if the board was so willing.
Okay.
Okay. Any additional questions? And so the direction you would be looking for is you would be looking for us to approve this?
Yeah, well, just basic direction, it's a work session. It's not
Or if it's a wash, do we not need to, I mean, or to give you direction to move ahead, I guess?
Yeah, it would just be direction, and just because it's 100% the board's prerogative to create any new employee positions with the town. So this is something that I would just bring to you, and then again, you would, I guess, formally approve it when we did the budget this year, but you would just know, just with direction, that you'd be okay with me doing it a few months early.
Okay. Chief, does this work for you with what is being suggested here?
Yes.
Okay. What are the feelings of the board, that we would move ahead?
I see no opposition.
Okay?
Okay,
Looks like you have a unanimous agreement to move forward.
great, thank you.
Okay. And then we will move on to Senate Bill 19-181 discussion. Are you going to be starting
Yeah,
us off
I'm
with
going to
that?
just heat
or-
up a little bit, then I'm going to sit down
Okay.
as quick as I can, Your Honor. So at the June 3rd work session, the town board discussed Senate Bill 19-181 and the aspects of oil and gas activities on which the board may want to have further discussion. Really, during the board's discussion, the big areas that you focused on were air quality monitoring, site location, and then reclamation of oil and gas sites. Another topic that came up during that conversation was the COGCC rulemaking process and where that was. There is a representative from the COGCC here tonight, and is actually the only scheduled presentation that we have at this time. We have also invited and are in presence the COGCC and the CDPHE, which is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. We've also invited the two operators that are most active in Windsor, Great Western and Extraction Oil. And I know we have at least one rep here. Okay, yeah, so we have a rep from Great Western. And then we also spoke to the fire department who's here. So this is really just the board's chance to ask a lot of questions of each other and the experts in the room, so you can kind of make informed decisions. So I don't know if you'd want to hear from the COGC rulemaking first, or it's really your prerogative on how you want to.
Yeah, let's proceed with who's ever making a presentation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good evening, Board. I'm Mike Leonard. I'm the Community Relations Manager with COGCC. I'm sorry, I don't have a presentation. I thought I was just coming here to answer questions.
Yeah, and
So-
that was what was in the packet, so.
Okay, well, I just meant as far as the rulemaking, a little bit of an update, so I'm
Sure,
not used.
well, I can talk about all that, yeah.
Yeah, I use presentation wrong, but.
Right. Last Thursday, the first set of the rule updates passed through the commission, and that was the allowance of administrative law judges or hearings officers to hear drilling and spacing unit cases. And the reasoning behind that was these were, there's so many of the drilling and spacing unit and cases in front of the commission, it really slows down the commission's process. So the thought process was allow the administrative law judges or hearings officers to hear these cases to free up the commission for regular rulemaking. Now, any protested cases will have to go in front of the commission, but the hope is most of those will not, so that the administrative law judges or the hearings officers at this time can hear those cases. So that passed Thursday. It was actually deliberated in June, at the June hearing, and then more deliberation, Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday, I can't remember, everything's piling together. We have posted a timeline on our website of the rulemakings when we're hoping to have the hearings for them. For instance, the Technical Review Board and Alternative Site Analysis, we hope to have the stakeholder process finished and that in front of the commission by the November hearing. I know there's been a lot of talk about why the mission change is put off so long. Stakeholder process will probably start very soon in that, but that's going to be a huge rulemaking. We call it the mission change, but what it means is we have to go through all of our rule book and conform to Senate Bill 181. So we have to take out the technically and economically feasible things. We have to take out everything that says foster. We have to rewrite the whole rule book. So every rule will have to be examined. That's why it'll be long. Yes, sir.
Could you repeat again the timeline on that?
So for the mission change, that March 2020 hearing.
March 2020.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I can go through them real quick. The flow line rulemaking, December of 19. Wellbore integrity, January of 20. Cumulative impacts and mission change will both be March of 2020. Financial assurance, that's July of 2020. And then worker certification, application fees, that's in September of 2020. And then there'll be a couple more rulemakings we have to do. One is the incorporation of CDPHE rules, and then we have to do a rulemaking with the wildlife, with CPW. There's actually we want to update our wildlife maps, but we have to have a rulemaking to update the maps. So that'll be farther out. And it may roll into any of these other rulemakings as we can work it in.
And what is your stakeholder process going to look like? Or
So
consist of?
Director Robbins has indicated that he wants to start an informal stakeholder process with industry, environmental groups, local governments, and go through that informal process and then start with the formal. They'll kind of get some of those ideas together and then start with the formal stakeholder meeting. That way we don't have to go through, meeting after meeting after meeting, a formal process, and then present it to the commission. Also, the commission is going to be involved. The commission members are going to be involved in the stakeholder meetings. In past years, there would be the stakeholder meeting and draft the rules, and all the stakeholders would come together and then hand it to the commissioners and have to explain what they did. The commissioners are going to be more involved so that they understand the process as we go through.
When you say stakeholder meetings, what's the period of time, or what's the time frame, and how are you going to engage with all of these folks?
So it's my understanding, I apologize because I was busy on some other things at the end of last week. The alternative site analysis, informal stakeholder meetings are going to start in the next week or so. And Director Robbins has a team that's reaching out to various people, putting notices out. I'm sure all the local governments will get noticed. And anybody that has standing in that particular process will be noticed.
So by stakeholders, you mean municipalities?
Any local government.
Any local government?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So we're not limiting it to municipalities. It can be the counties. It can be.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So there's over 200 local governments.
Correct.
How are you, is it going to be a selective process, or is it open to anybody, or?
I believe it's open to anybody that has standing.
Okay.
Yeah, I realize there's over 200 local governments.
It's a lot, yeah.
But a lot of them don't have oil and gas
Right,
activity
that's
in their
true.
area.
Okay.
Many local governments, as Mark Morton, the local government liaison, we sent out a survey early in June asking local governments, and we got about 60 responses back out of 200 and some. Many just said, well, we don't want anything to do with it, just you do it. Others came back very robustly and said, we really want to be engaged in this. So, and I'm sure we're using that list to send out notices for all these meetings.
Okay, Mr. Baker?
The COGCC doesn't have a problem with us passing our own rules in the meantime.
Nope. I believe Adams County is close. Well, I do know that they have sent out their draft rules. They've asked for comment by August 13th. They say they want to have their rules in place on or before September 5th, and that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Kozlowski?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, looking at the timeline on this, you've got hearings going out into September of 2020, and your timeline doesn't really have a column or a designation for like issuance of final rules, but obviously it would be after September 2020. There are certainly a few critical rules that are required to be adopted by COGCC, hopefully before the board turns over, the commission turns over. Will you be releasing those on a partial basis? If you feel like you're done with one of the major categories, would you release them as final? Or do you think they're going to wait all the way to the end until everything's done?
They'll release them as they happen.
Okay.
So there's a process. So for instance, in November, we hope that, because things happen, okay, we really want to stick to this. It's a fairly aggressive timeline, but we hope in November we've got alternative site analysis and the technical review board in front of the commission. If they vote to approve that, and there's always the possibility that they'll vote and send it back, to update or review or whatever. If they vote to approve that, then there's a certain period of time that it has to go to the Secretary of State's office to be approved, to make sure it's constitutional, and then it becomes rule. And I don't remember how many days.
I'm not certain, I think it's 60 days.
It's like 60 days upon. It has to be published by the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Jones?
Yes, could you take us through the permitting process as it now stands? And I know everything's kind of in a state of flux. You're working on rules. Local governments are looking into how they might participate. But if someone came into you today and said, we want to put a well 2 miles north of Windsor in city limits, how would you handle that? How would you involve local government at this point?
Sure. So we have 2 permits, I think you may know. So there's the permit for the well, or the Form 2, the permit to drill. They call it the APD, approved permit to drill. And then there's the 2A, which is the location assessment permit, which is the actual ground disturbance and what's going to be, what physically is going to be disturbed at the surface. Okay? So that's 2 permits. We have a period of time, and I believe it's 10 days. When we receive a permit, we give it a completeness, what we call a completeness check. And what that does is they go through and just make sure all the boxes are checked. Now, it doesn't review to make sure that everything's correct, but all the boxes are checked. If it passes that completeness check, then it moves on to the actual permitters that look at the permits. So the engineering group, as soon as the completeness check is done, the local governments receive notice that that permit is in the door. And then you have that period of time, 20 days, to make either make comments, and I believe that goes to Scott. You can either make comments or Scott can ask for an extension to that under the current rules. So the permitting group, the engineers look at the downhole configuration of the well, make sure that it's adequately protecting groundwater. It's going where they say they're going to go. The oil and gas location assessment specialists start looking at the surface features. How large is the disturbance at construction? How large will it be at interim reclamation? Is that reasonable? How many tanks are on there? Where's it positioned? Okay. After that, that goes through, and there's a lot of back and forth with the operators trying to get information on many of these permits. Then it goes into what's called final review. And a final reviewer goes through and makes sure everything's correct, that the bottom hole location that's on the permit is it's legal bottom hole location. Okay? Then it has to go through the director's objective criteria. So I think you probably know in May, Director Robbins released his 15 or 16 objective criteria. If any of those criteria are hit in that on that oil and gas location assessment permit, then it has to go in front of the director for approval before it goes on. That's kind of a 10,000 foot.
What does Windsor do during that 20 days that we have to comment?
So yeah, once we receive notification, if it's a oil and gas pad that's already been through the local process and received conditional use grant approval, we will upload the conditions of approval from the conditional use grant to the COGCC's system so that those are on the permit. And then if it's a pad or a well that hasn't yet been before the town board, then we put this disclaimer language in there that this is in Windsor and it needs to go through the conditional use grant process. And we usually also say these are the standard conditions of approval that we usually recommend with. So we include the conditions, but we also put the disclaimer that we need a local approval at that time.
Okay, and then if it's outside of our town limits, but within our growth management area, it's kind of an FYI, we don't really have any say-so or input. Is that true?
Then we have standard language that we upload that just says, although this isn't in Windsor, it's within our growth management area, and these are the conditions of approval that we normally recommend if it were in town.
Yeah, I think as we move forward, hopefully we can work closer with Weld and Larimer counties within our growth management area instead of just deferring to them and maybe hoping they'll take our CUG into account.
Well, right now, we don't have to take something that's outside into Weld, and they don't have to come before us with a CUG.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I'm asking Scott.
Right, if it's not in town, it wouldn't go through the conditional use grant process.
Thank you.
Jones.
Did you have a follow-up?
Scott, before you go. Now, in addition to what we've usually put into the CUG, can we add citing into that part of the process with the new law? Yeah, the conditional use grant conditions of approval that we typically put on a conditional use grant are simply the standard that we've used over the years, the last few years. If the town board wants to change those conditions of approval, that's well within your purview, as long as we're not conflicting with any, I guess, requirements that are outside our purview. Okay, and one more here on your map that you gave us in the packet. You've got the rain dance pad, the bro pad. When you say wells planned, that's the same as wells approved or permitted?
So yes, the 59 total wells planned is what was in that conditional use grant that was approved for rain dance. The 42 wells over at the Bro FD pad are what Great Western has indicated that they plan to apply for. Now that one we haven't received a conditional use grant for yet, but that's information we received within the last week and a half from Great Western Oil and Gas.
And they've been permitted, correct?
No, I don't believe the Bro pad, I believe is still in their planning process, and I don't believe anything has been permitted through the state or hasn't gone through the local process. The rain dance pad has been through the town's process, and a certain number have been approved or permitted through the state, but they still have several planned.
Okay, and the ones up north, what's their status?
They're actually under staff review right now, and actually they are scheduled for Planning Commission and Town Board meetings and public hearings within the next month.
And again, not necessarily permitted, but says proposed.
Those two, I don't know the status of the state permitting. I just know that it's in the local process right now, and they're actually scheduled for Planning Commission Wednesday night.
Okay, thanks.
So is this a complete list of sites?
Excuse me, would you like to be recognized? Because Mr. Soslovsky, I think, had
Okay.
a question next. And
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, back, it's Mike. I didn't catch the last name.
Leonard?
Leonard? No, that's easy. And I really want to follow up a little bit on what Dr. Jones was asking in terms of the permitting process, and certainly I've seen the director's objective criteria, but I've heard all these rumors, and I really don't know that there were some 6,000 permits in process, and that not very many have gotten through the approval process since the objective criteria come out. Do you have like a current number on how many permits are in
I don't have a specific number, but that's correct. There's about 6,000 well permits throughout the state that are in process, and about 500 and some location permits.
Okay.
And just, I should have put this in the permitting process, but any location that's within 1,500 feet of a municipality, that falls in the director's objective criteria. And what the director's looking for is what has that operator done to minimize impacts to that municipality? Has that operator talked to that municipality? You know, for instance, truck traffic and things like that. And they also have to give us the dispensation that the municipality may have. For instance, if you do have siting rules and things like that, they have to show us that you're good with that permit.
Thank you.
are you finished? Okay, Mr. Wilson, and then Mr. Bennett.
Okay. Probably a question for Scott. The list that's up on the screen, that's not a comprehensive list of all, there's a lot more. Are these just the bigger sites, or what is on the screen versus what is not? Like the smaller sites like Berlin, I don't see. Like in the rain dance area, I think Great Western and Extraction have operations in there. I don't
Yeah,
see
so
Great Western.
anything that's already been approved and has been drilled is not on this list. These are the ones that we've asked both of the local operators what they foresee in the next 5 years, and these are essentially what we've received from Great Western and what we're currently reviewing from Extraction.
Okay.
But we've got a little more detail with the two Great Western pads, 8 to 16 wells per year over the life of the pad. I don't believe we have current numbers as far as how long Extraction plans to build out those other two pads.
Thank you. And then, but this is the last quick question is, in this process, what's the criteria for notifying nearby residents of new operations coming into their area or neighborhood?
So the conditional use grant process requires the operator to host a neighborhood meeting that staff attends. I believe the notification distance is 500 feet. And the CUG itself then requires a public hearing before planning commission and before town board. And that's posted on the website and in the newspaper and here in town hall.
The 500 feet is basically the radius.
For the neighborhood meeting, yes.
Seems kind of small, but okay, I'm done.
Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, first I just want to echo what Mr. Wilson said earlier. As we move forward with criteria, I would echo the sim of trying to work with Weld and Larimer County, as well as I see something here from Severance and the fire district. So the more we can look at things regionally, I think there's some potential benefit of that. My question to the state is, I think I know the answer, is under 181, you cannot finalize a permit until the local community approves it. Is that correct?
Something like that, yeah. If you do have
Okay,
citing.
something like that.
Well, if you have citing regulations, yes. And really what we are doing is we're working with the local communities. So it's not, the disconnect with 181 is it says you can't approve the drilling permits. It doesn't say you cannot approve the location permit.
Okay.
So that's and also you have to have, really you have to have the operator has to have dispensation to get the drilling inspection unit as well.
So I'm just checking my understanding. So the state could approve a location for drilling, but the state could not approve or give a permit for drilling until the local community approves its conditional use grant or whatever.
That's
process.
correct.
Okay, I just want to make certain I understood that. Talk a little bit more about this 1,500 feet. Following Dr. Jones's question, if there was a permit 1,500 feet outside of the town limits of Windsor, what happens then?
So then the director,
would
that's where the director looks at it in the objective criteria meeting and asks questions such as, has this operator contacted the town of Windsor? What mitigation factors have they put in to reduce truck traffic or to, anything that's going to affect Windsor? Have they contacted you and talked to you?
Would we have the authority to say yes or no, that they're 1,500 feet outside our town limits? Could we apply our conditional use criteria to that?
I'm not an attorney.
I don't, okay. I think I know the answer, but I just wanted to.
Mr. McCarter, do you have anything that you could add on that?
My opinion on that is that the CUG process applies to areas within town limits.
Right.
You'd have to understand that the director would have to be comfortable with approving those permits, and ultimately he could hold them through the whole rulemaking process.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Baker?
I have a question for Mr. Ballstadt. A few moments ago, in regards to the CUG process, you said we cannot add stuff that's not under our purview. Don't we have a new purview with the new, more local control now?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't inferring that, what I was saying, if the town board wanted to get into anything that's operational, downhole, things that are typically not our purview.
Okay.
But yeah, I think Senate Bill 181 definitely, I guess, opens the door for additional things, but Ian might be able to speak more to what those additional local regulations, what they could be.
Okay.
I think Ian did a good job of summarizing some of those things in the previous work session.
Okay. Mr. Ortmeyer?
Mr. Wallstead, on this, the rain dance pad, 14 wells completed, 59 total planned. How many got approved when that originally was I think, because I remember the 59 number or something like that. Wasn't it 59 over 5 years? There was a time, wasn't there a time factor that they had so many years, or that their process was going to take so many years to drill all of them? Because they weren't going to do them all at once. They were going to move the equipment and come back. I just remember when when we were covering that CUG for that project.
Right. I believe the CUG actually accounted for a couple additional wells. The 59 is what Great Western indicated last week that they plan to drill at that property. I believe the CUG may have been for 61 or 2, something like that. And while there was a discussion about the time frame, and they were going to come back in, I guess, drill several at a time in different periods, I don't believe that there was an end date in the CUG. I'd have to look that up, but I know that there were other reasons, just the timing of the surface development of the property. I think between the property owner and the oil and gas company, they have a time frame that they want to meet just so that the surface development can occur.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any additional questions for Mr. Leonard? Then do we have somebody else this evening as well?
Yeah, well, we also have the CDPHE is in attendance as well. So, and again, I think we just, instead of having formal presentations, we just asked them to be here to answer the board's questions.
Okay.
And then we also invited both local operators as well. We do have somebody from Great Western.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, Board. My name's Sean Hackett. I'm the Energy Liaison for CDPHE, so I'm our bridge between our agency and the COGCC. I'm happy to follow up on what Mr. Leonard discussed about the COGCC rulemakings required by Senate Bill 19-181. So in addition to substantial changes over at the COGCC and the expansion of local control, Senate Bill 181 builds upon Colorado's efforts to minimize emissions from the industry. Specifically, it directs Colorado's Air Quality Control Commission to minimize emissions from oil and gas facilities, and it adopted a pretty broad definition of what an oil and gas facility is for purposes of that statute. It includes exploration and production sites through the transmission sector, and in terms of pollutants that were required to minimize, it specifically calls out methane, VOCs, and NOx emissions. It also directs that the Air Quality Control Commission consider certain strategies, including the following: semi-annual leak detection at exploration and production facilities, inspection and maintenance requirements for transmission pipelines and compressor stations, continuous methane monitoring at large emitting facilities, multi-well facilities, and facilities in close proximity to occupied dwellings, and also it calls upon the Commission to reduce emissions from pneumatic devices. It also clarifies the Air Quality Control Commission's regulatory authority over emissions that occur during the pre-production, drilling and completion phases. And it's important, I think, to point out that the directives under Senate Bill 181 are part of a larger effort, a larger process to improve air quality in Colorado that the legislature has called upon the Commission to do. Those additional efforts include combating global climate change through greenhouse gas emission reductions, bringing the Front Range Denver Metro ozone non-attainment area into compliance with federal health-based ozone standards, addressing regional haze, reducing nitrogen deposition in Rocky Mountain National Park. And real quickly to kind of highlight what our rulemaking schedule is right now, at least our anticipated schedule. It's important to note that this is definitely going to be an iterative process that will probably require multiple rulemakings over the coming months and years. And currently our schedule is, we're anticipating requesting a hearing in front of the Commission. That request will occur on September 19th, and that's going to be at CDPHE in our main hearing room, the Save and Clear room. Then after that request occurs, there will be a pre-hearing process from late September through early December. And the Commission then has the discretion on when and whether to set the hearing. If they set the hearing as we request, then the hearing would be held the week of December 16th, and the Commission would set the specific schedule on that. And I skipped over the actual stakeholder engagement process. What I described there is the formal rulemaking process. So the stakeholder engagement process, the Air Pollution Control Division had their first Senate Bill 181 stakeholder kickoff meeting back on July 29th. It was kind of a come one, come all. Anyone from any different stakeholder group, including local governments or municipalities, could participate in that. The next stakeholder group for the Air Division will be August 22nd from 8:30 to 11. And the hope there is that they'll discuss some draft regulatory language, and I believe they're going to put out a straw man proposal at that point. September 4th, we are holding a public participation workshop up in Broomfield. That'll be from 6 to 8 o'clock p.m. And really that's separate from the stakeholder process and separate from the formal rulemaking process. It's kind of an opportunity for us to engage with less traditional stakeholders who maybe haven't argued in front of the Air Commission before, to sort of help level the playing field, make sure they understand the pros and cons of being a public commenter versus being an actual rulemaking party, and understand how the pre-hearing and hearing process works. So that will be September 4th at the Broomfield Library Auditorium from 6 to 8 p.m. And then also, we'll be holding a meeting on the West Slope in Grand Junction on September 10th from 4 to 7 p.m. And that's going to discuss the rulemaking hearing and provide a public comment opportunity. And then one thing I just wanted to point out, another requirement in Senate Bill 181 that brings our agencies, COGCC and CDPHE, even closer together is the cumulative impacts rulemaking. The language of the bill specifically says that COGCC has to develop that rule in consultation with CDPHE. So we are meeting regularly with them to scope out that rulemaking process. Any questions?
Are there any questions for Mr. Hackett? Mr. Baker?
Yeah, so at our last meeting, we talked about air quality monitoring and evaluation, and that's in our memo, so I'll kind of segue to that. We talked, or my thought was some sort of open source data collection where we could share it. Do you guys have a list of approved companies, or that's part one? Part two would be, do you have a depository where this information could go from all over the state to you and people could analyze it from you? Yeah.
So the short answer to both of those questions is no. We can't endorse or provide warranties for any companies out there, so we don't have a list of approved companies. And second question, do we have a repository or any capacity to review air quality data or compile air quality data that's collected by third parties or local governments? I would say that we've offered that, and we are doing that with Broomfield currently and with Garfield County currently, and it certainly is within our purview, but it kind of comes down to resources. I don't want to sound bitter here or anything, but Senate Bill 181 did not allocate any additional staff to CDPHE, so we're having to operate under our existing staff, which is kind of firing on all cylinders right now. So I don't want to totally discount that as a possibility. I just it would need to be asked of the Oil and Gas Health Information Response Program. That's where our state toxicologist is housed, and they're a very small skeletons crew right now, so it would be very challenging for them to pick up additional data and run those through the health risk assessment models.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Mr. Young?
Mayor, I just have a follow-up question. So what would be the town's process or the municipal process to advocate for that? Because I think certainly when we talk about the technical expertise, it's great to have the CDPHE, the COGCC. You have a lot of the expertise, but if they really aren't available to us, it doesn't really help us out. So what process could we go through to advocate to help you with the staff?
Sure, I think the first step, and I can share some contact information with you, would be to make the ask, and I'm happy to relay it to them directly. Speak with the Oil and Gas Health Information and Response Group, and I'll make sure to pass along their contact info just to kind of get a feeling of where their resources are currently. And then in terms of next steps, how to get them additional funding, I want to be cautious to not advocate for anything like that, but I think it would be an ask of the legislature. They would need to specifically allocate some additional staff to that program for that specific purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bennett?
Yeah. Senate Bill 181 requires you to do semi-annual inspections. I thought I heard you say that.
Yeah, semi-annual leak detection and repair.
Okay. So what that means is if there was a problem today, you may not know about it for 6 months, right?
That's just one of the normal inspection queues that it would be. It would jump onto the normal inspection queue for that 6-month time frame, but that doesn't necessarily mean it wouldn't be inspected at whatsoever in the interim.
Okay. And my understanding is, even before 181, you're very short on staff. How many inspectors do you have statewide? approximately?
My understanding is currently, I think there's still some vacancies, but I think we're at about 12 or 13 full-time inspectors that are dedicated to oil and gas.
For X thousand number of, okay, thank you. One more thing, this is kind of a follow-up on what Mr. Baker was asking. If the town chose to contract with a vendor, air quality monitoring, or we purchase our own, or require the industry to provide it, and we got some kind of technology, and it gives us some kind of indication today that there could be a problem, and we call the state, how long before we could get somebody who really knows what they're looking at to check it out?
I guess that's, requiring me to
Tough.
speculate quite a
Okay,
bit. I'm
tough
not
question.
entirely sure on
Okay.
that. But when you say identify a problem, do you specifically, I guess you're kind of referring to if there's a regulatory violation or some sort of actual violation?
Well, if we had some type of air quality monitoring equipment on site, and whatever data it gives us a warning that there may be a leak, there may be some venting of something. We're not the experts to interpret that. And so we're not petroleum engineers, we're not environmental engineers. We would want to then call somebody who's an expert. So what I'm getting at is how feasible is that?
Well, I'm not
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
industry expert, but there are folks in the room. Isn't there a process already like that in place?
Yeah, I mean.
If there's something that goes amiss on a site,
Yeah, so in addition to the COGCC
I would
complaint.
assume somebody would be, there's already a process of what happens, and I would assume somebody gets notified.
Right, correct, yeah. So in addition to the COGCC complaint response process, we've got 2 programs at CDPHE that would be engaged in complaint response, and it sounds like the situation you're describing. That's our Air Pollution Control Division, Oil and Gas team. I can share their contact information as well. They have a general email box that's always monitored, and they make sure to, if there's a alleged regulatory violation or some sort of odor issue, then the person who's watching that email box will make sure to assign an inspector as soon as possible. And then separate from that, those inspectors are just focused on air quality issues, odor issues, those types of things. Then we have another program, which is a non-regulatory program. That's the Oil and Gas Health Information Response Program. And that program works in partnership with our Air Division, works very closely with COGCC, and we track and investigate citizen health complaints. And depending on the nature of the complaint, the severity, the number of the complaint, a number of different factors, like if we're seeing a complaint cluster or if there's been a history of violations in the area, then we can talk about what we're possibly able to do in terms of additional air quality monitoring in the area. And that usually takes a 2-step process where we do some initial air quality screening using a one-time grab sample, assume a canister, and kind of depending on that and whether or not the complaints continue, we can talk about our more comprehensive mobile laboratory.
Okay, Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I have the leak detection and repair annual report from the CDPHE for extraction oil and gas. So I think we just need to, as a municipality, dig down deeper into what these leaks are. What's that mean from emissions and health-wise? But just for this one operator in Colorado in 1 year, it's like 418 sites inspected, 2,823 leaks. Most of them, a large majority, almost all of them have been repaired. But, like Mr. Bennett said, some of them could have been going on for months. How severe are these leaks? I guess we don't really have that information. And then as far as the spot checks and canisters, I understand they can be pretty accurate. But from my experiences, the emissions are very random. One day it might not be anything, one day it could be very bad, depending where they are in the process and what's going on. So it seems like, I would like to see continuous monitoring within Windsor, and I think what people are alluding to is if we invest in some kind of our own monitoring, would you guys be willing to use that data? And hopefully, I know Longmont, Broomfield was mentioned, other communities that are doing this type of monitoring, that it would help you guys get more accurate data. And then I did have some stuff I wanted to share with you that I'll forward along. This is from NOAA, and they came out. They came out 3 times to Windsor over the last 4 months or so. But just looking at July 18th, for example, what their statement to me was today was this is for methane, CH4 is methane, was that anything above 2,400 parts per billion was cause for serious concern. And at Eastman Park, we registered like 3,586 parts per billion, about 150% above what that was. If you look at the map, it's kind of coded green. That's on the third page for the July 18th sampling. You can see there's some areas are green, some are yellow, and some are definitely red, with that kind of right in the center of town. And so I guess first off, I want to make you aware that, but it seems like we're already in where we have some serious submissions, and I think this shows it. NOAA is obviously somebody, it's not a third party, it's our government. And this is a preliminary report on methane. There's going to be more information will follow. You mentioned Dr. Detlef Helmig. I did attend with at least one other board member last week, and he talked about how if the methane side, generally the other VOCs are going to be high to well, is that they generally travel together. So it'll be interesting to see in the next few months when we get the rest of this data where it's at. But to me, it clearly shows that as a town, we have a lot of fracking, and we need to, in our air, is obviously not where it should be. And I would like to understand a little bit better what is being emitted and how harmful it is to our residents. And so I get it that you guys are short-staffed and so on. And so I think that's why we're seeing this trend where we're seeing communities step up in this effort on their own. But so anyway, I don't know if you have any kind of, I'm throwing this at you for the first time, but if you have any
Right, and
comments.
that's what I was going to say is just, thank you for providing me with this information. It's definitely the first opportunity I've had to take a look at it, so I don't really know that I have much to provide at this point, and I'm not an air quality scientist myself, but what I'll do is I'll commit to you to take this back with our staff, with our air division staff, and kind of get their thoughts on it and see what sort of follow-up
All right.
questions or issues they might have.
Okay.
It's kind of the same topic. Back to my earlier question about your process for inspection. You talked about you respond when you get complaints. Generally, where do the complaints come from? Is it well, just who do the complaints come from? What initiates the process?
Typically, it starts with a complaint from a citizen, and the complaint either is forwarded to us by COGCC. Sometimes the citizen will contact COGCC first, and if they have some sort of health symptom related to the complaint, COGCC will forward that to us, and our oil and gas health information response group will initiate the complaint process on our end. Alternatively, citizens can report complaints directly to that program. So they've got several options for doing that. They can, all their contact information, and I do have some cards that I can share with everyone, but their contact information is on their website. Complainants can submit a complaint over the phone. They can submit a complaint electronically through a form on the website, or they can submit emails to that program. So that's typically how the process is initiated. And one thing that I do need to kind of point out, and we make sure to communicate this pretty clearly to citizens, is we need to hear firsthand from citizens. So citizens who say that they've heard complaints from neighbors or they're compiling complaints from a group of concerned people, we strongly encourage them to have those people submit complaints directly to us so that we can be better at tracking and investigating those.
So when you collect your complaints, you get people's names, I would assume address and contact information to verify and to be able to make sure that what we're looking at is something valid. Because I know over the past several weeks we've gotten a lot of complaints, but there's never been a single party that has been connected to those complaints. We don't ever receive a name, a contact, or any information. And so I don't think we can give very much credits to those kind of complaints when they come in, when there's not connected to any name or address. They can't be verified.
I could provide several names right now.
Well, you've sent a lot of emails over the past couple of weeks, and you never, with those emails, ever supply a name, contact information. All you do is supply the complaint. And you never give any of the names. And you've been doing that ever since we announced that we were going to be having this meeting. So I just want that for the record, that when we do collect complaints and when we do take things seriously, which we do, but we need to make sure that who we're talking to, and we've got the address and we've got the information, so that we can know what we're dealing with, and so that we can best handle it the best way possible.
And for the record, I'm not making this up. Some of the people in the room that have complained, generally, I refer people to the CDPHE and the COGCC.
But you
and then
continue
I pass it
to
along to
send
the town
comments
board.
along to the board, and it is never associated with a single person,
It's not true.
a single name, or a single contact.
That's
None
not
of the
true.
emails that you have sent, I went back through all the emails that you sent about all the complaints, and you don't list a single person or party.
And if I could
It's
just
not true.
kind of respond to that. So we typically, citizens do have the option to submit complaints anonymously to us. We usually encourage them to provide us with their name and contact information, because that
Yes.
definitely makes our investigation process
Yeah,
easier.
you have to be able to have that, so that you know what
Right,
you're
and
dealing
then
with.
one thing that I wanted to kind of just highlight for any citizens in the room who maybe are experiencing health symptoms that they think are due to oil and gas and they want to report those, we are more than willing to keep that information confidential. I mean, a lot of the stuff we're dealing with is personal health information, so it would be protected under laws like HIPAA. So they have the option of reporting to us anonymously, and I don't want to take that option away from them. So that's just something I wanted to add on to that conversation.
Sure. Mr. Kozlowski.
Thank you, Mayor. Shauna, just kind of to get an idea, I looked at the expanded guidelines that the Air Quality Control Commission has under 181, and you referenced, the list of the 4 new items, I guess. So if you in fact go down a path where you're requiring continuous monitoring or additional testing and additional metering, and so the operator is installing all of this stuff as required by your commission, and a particular meter picks up a burst, a release, where does that information automatically then go to you? Or does it just go to the operator?
So that's a couple steps ahead of where we are right now for me to be able to really answer that without speculating too much. My thought would be, and here I am speculating, but if we had a rule that required continuous emission monitoring, it wouldn't just be for the purpose of requiring monitoring. We'd require some reporting piece. There would be a reporting piece involved with that. So I would imagine that we would require operators to submit that to CDPHE.
So it would be operators' obligation to monitor and report?
Yeah, and I just
need
need to...
information that would go automatically to through some server?
Yeah, and I need to be really clear that it's total speculation at this point, because we don't have a rule proposal on that piece specifically, and we don't have a database identified for housing that type of emissions data if it were to come to us. So currently, there's no process in place for sort of like an automatic notification to CDPHE if there's some sort of regulatory limit or health guideline value that's exceeded. It's certainly within the scope of the conversation under that continuous emission monitoring rulemaking.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I want to ask this in a way that does not come across as a loaded question, because I don't mean it that way. I'm pretty much an advocate for some type of continuous air monitoring, either owned by the town or required by the town. And my question is, I absolutely respect and like the right that as a citizen I can call in a complaint, and I appreciate probably that should remain confidential from the state part. But would it help you if a community had some type of air quality monitoring system to back up or verify a complaint?
I mean, we'd have to assume that it follows the appropriate QA/QC procedures and it's calibrated appropriately and everything like that. But
all the technical...
I would say if there was, validated emissions data accompanying a complaint, it certainly is useful information for us in figuring out how to respond and what additional air monitoring resources we might have at our disposal for that community.
And I'm not certain that the technology that other communities are using is always valid. It might be, I don't know. I'm just looking for an early detection system, early warning.
And I think that would be useful information to us.
Well, my understanding is, because we've had a conversation, that a lot of this equipment is kind of in the early stages. of the technology. And so there really is not a real good source currently. That they're in the model right now to be coming out, but I mean that was what my understanding was with some conversations with some folks a couple months ago.
Sure, and I guess I'm not familiar with the specific technology you're referring to, but one resource that I added in the packet that I wanted to draw your attention to, and it was a late submittal, so I'm not sure if it got in there. I submitted it probably Friday afternoon, but that's something that our air scientists put together. It's a small sensor guidance document, and it references the EPA toolbox. So that does speak to some of the limitations that you were, I think, referencing there.
Other communities have references to that one also.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. McCarter.
Sean, does the system that Garfield County uses, because we have spent a little bit of time familiarizing ourselves with that, how would you describe the quality of their air monitoring equipment, regardless of how their program works? But are their sampling devices state of the art, or can you give us any information on that?
You know, I don't know. That's a tricky question. Since again, I'm not a scientist, but I would. So I don't know that it's state of the art, but I would say that it's something that CDPHE recognizes as a good, valuable, valid air monitoring program, and that's you know, the quality of that program is part of the reason why we were willing and able to look at their air monitoring data on the back end and run that through our health. Look at the potential health impacts of that is because we do think that it's relatively strong data that we're reviewing.
Mr. Baker.
Along those same lines, is that site specific, or is that more of a regional, town-wide kind of?
So I think the main one that Mr. Carter is referring to is it is site specific. It was a county level permit condition that Ursa Operating received that required them to pay for and work very closely with the county and their third party air contractor on the monitoring program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wilson.
We've had some discussions recently about flaring versus venting, the health impacts of each, when it's legal to vent versus flare. Can you comment on that, or other people in the room are welcome to chime in?
Sure, yeah, and I would invite anyone else who wants to chime in on that with me, but I guess to start that conversation, the specific question that I saw was maybe CDPHE can talk about, excuse me, health effects of venting versus flaring. So I just wanted to draw your attention to how we define venting and where those definitions are contained, first of all. So first, venting is defined in our Air Quality Control Commission Regulation number 7. That's our primary oil and gas regulation. It defines venting as emissions that are primarily the result of overpressurization that are from an open or visibly unseated pressure relief device. And Reg 7, Section 17 goes on to say that there's no prohibition on venting, but what it does require is that specifically for well maintenance or liquids unloading events, which is what I understand the maintenance at the rain dance pad to have been, they have to ensure that any venting to the atmosphere is limited to the maximum extent practicable. And so kind of in general terms, and we haven't specifically, done a study saying health impacts from venting versus flaring, but just sort of in general, the difference would be that venting is uncontrolled and is released directly into the atmosphere, whereas flaring is sent to a control device that usually has about a 98% control efficiency. So potentially, all other things being equal, site location, operator, technology, a venting event could potentially have a higher potential for health impacts than a flaring event, just because flaring combusts most of that gas before a citizen could be exposed to it.
Seems pretty obvious that there would be much higher health impacts. I don't think there's any could or may. I mean, it seems very obvious to me.
Well, does the CDPH, do you have higher incident rates of higher health incidences in Weld County versus other counties in the state?
Yeah, that you can see. We have information about that, and Weld County, I think, is the top source of our concerns, if I'm not mistaken, or Broomfield County.
Or what?
Or Broomfield, City and County of Broomfield. That's where a bulk of our complaints come from, those two counties.
Yeah, but do you see higher actual incidence rates of any of these medical concerns
That I don't know.
versus other counties?
I don't know the answer.
Because there was a report that came out several years ago that compared Larimer to Weld, and the incidence rates on numerous medical conditions between both counties were equal. In some cases, Weld County was actually had lower incidence rate percentages, and that came from your office. So I don't know if you had done an updated one since that last report came out?
You know, I don't know specifically that.
Or was that a
incident
special
rate.
report that was requested or something?
I guess I'm not familiar with this incident rate issue that you're referring to.
Okay.
We did do a health risk assessment in 2017, and we're currently in the process of getting that updated. It's working its way through the peer review process now, currently.
Okay. Mr. Leonard, did you have something?
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to speak to a little bit about venting and flaring. As Sean said, venting can only happen in basically an emergency or upset condition. Flaring, once a well goes into production, the operator must request a permit to flare from the COGCC, and for the reasoning. So if they're in a maintenance condition, or if they're working on that well or maintenance condition, we're also asking operators to flare as much of that gas as they can.
So you are requesting that?
We're doing a little more than requesting.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Sosowski.
I really guess just to follow up with both of you, I think what you're speaking to is really the current state of your regulations and enforcement. I'm curious if either of you kind of anticipate that as you go through rulemaking in the coming year or so, whether that's one of the issues you would look at to tighten up, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, it will be. I don't have a specific venting or flaring rule language in front of me yet, but it's likely that the emission threshold might fall on that, so we're requiring additional reporting for smaller facilities, but I don't have a specific proposal in front of me at this point.
Yeah, and that'll be part of COGCC's mission change as we look through all our rules.
Right.
Okay. Any additional questions?
I guess lastly, does the CDPHE believe that there are health risks of living close to fracking?
We, based on the review that we've done, the 2017 report, looking at the available air monitoring data and standardized health risk assessment methods, we've determined that the risk is low for residents living near oil and gas development. However,
Is low?
Is low. However, there's an important caveat or limitation to put on that rule. That's a conclusion that we're only able to draw during the point in time where we're actually monitoring the emissions. So that's a, I think, important limitation to point out.
Okay. I would like to hear, or do you have some few other things?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing that I would want to draw the board's attention to, and any residents in the room, and I'm happy to share this, might help shed some light on it, but back in June of 2015, there was a kind of a joint research effort published between some of the scientists within our oil and gas health program and the Pennsylvania Department of Health. Was called A Systematic Review of the Epidemiologic Literature Assessing Health Outcomes in Populations Living Near Oil and Natural Gas Operations, Study Quality and Future Recommendations. So I think that might help provide some additional clarity on that question.
Is it in the current packet, or is that something you said you were going to
That's
send?
separate, so I'll have to get that to you separately.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hale, did we have anybody else scheduled? If not, I would ask if there's somebody from the industry who also wanted to come forward to talk just about what their current conditions and what's going on, if they would wanted to.
Right, yeah, Your Honor, I was just gonna add, just for the public, so any additional information that's sent, we'll send it to the board, but we'll also just put it on the website, so there's a place for our residents to go and see it as well, so we can do both.
Okay. So is there anybody who wanted to? Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Melendez, and the members of the town board, public who has shown up tonight. My name is Susan Faharzadeh. I'm Director of Corporate Affairs for Great Western Oil and Gas. I did not come prepared with any comments.
No, but you've heard a lot of the general conversation. Yes. And I just would like, as part of the industry, maybe you could speak to maybe what current procedures you have in place, how much you are or are not maybe monitoring, that kind of thing.
Happy to do so. To give a little context, in my role at Great Western, I'm responsible for our local and state government relations, also our communications plan and our community investment strategy. So I'm only putting that out there so that you know I'm by far the smartest person or the technical expert in the room, but we'll be happy to tell you about some of the programs that we're implementing right now. A big topic that I heard from a lot of you was continuous air emissions monitoring. I'm really pleased to say that our team was looking into and developing a pilot program for that before 181 was even a number. I think it's in our best interests for everybody to be looking at this type of technology. It's very, very new. As I said, we are piloting a couple of different programs. I will try and give you a description in the best layman's terms I can, because that's pretty much all I have at my resource. But we are looking at technologies that will help us have real-time reporting if there is a leak. Will provide us really, really solid data, including baseline emissions monitoring, so we can understand what the emissions in that area looks like before we even begin pad construction, for example. We really want a system that is reliable. We want a system that we can count on to be continuous, that we know is available out there in all sorts of weather or energy environments. And we also want a system that provides context, because data without context really is just a whole lot of information. And so we're looking for a system that will help us determine what are the emissions that are being created on the location, what are emissions that are coming onto the location from other nearby sources, so that we can then give folks like you and the general public and the state agencies the best picture of what's happening out there, and then if there's an issue, that we can best respond and implement a plan to address such. Trying to think of if anybody has a question. I'm just thinking top of mind.
So how soon are you going to start implementing these? And these would be on anything that you would be doing on. I mean, I know you have to probably roll it out.
Yes.
Site by site.
Yeah.
But do you have a timeline of what you're looking at?
Well, it's hard to say again because it's in the early stages of piloting, but I can tell you we've already launched one in Adams County. So we are already looking at that. We've already gotten several weeks of baseline testing. So it's something that we're really actively focused on right now. Again, not being the technical expert, we really want to be transparent. We're really proud of this technology. We're really proud of these innovations that we're able to introduce and share with our peers in industry. So if I can create an opportunity to provide follow-up data with one of our environmental health and science experts, I'd be happy to do so.
And what are you? So once you collect this data, obviously, you said it's in Adams County.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to want access to that data. Who else or what else? How else are you going to share that information?
During this pilot project, we have agreed to, I believe it's a monthly report. It's on a 2-week lag. Again, data without context is really just a lot of information. So what we do is we work with the vendor to get this information into a report that is easily understood and is relevant to the interests of what the county has. So we have made that a condition of approval on one of our most recently approved pads in Adams County. I think what our time frame looks like for implementing that on future projects really determines the success of this pilot. And I'm really optimistic. We're looking at a lot of different programs right now, but once we find a successful solution, we're going to be thrilled to be able to make that part of our technology on site. Again, for us to know real time, even where on a pad, not just, hey, you've got an issue on this pad, but where on a pad we might potentially have an issue. That also goes back to some of the questions and concerns you had about inspections. We're out there doing inspections on a very, very regular basis. We don't rely on state inspectors to do that job for us, but this really just gives us that technology to have that instant access to know when there's an alarm or when there's an issue that needs to be addressed.
And I realize you're not like the industry person on site, but can you answer to the assertion that Mr. Wilson made about the numerous leaks? I mean, I don't know. Is that common that happens on well sites that there are these leaks that happen? Is this an uncommon experience? And what is the most typical thing that is leaking, and how quickly is it resolved or fixed?
Sure, sure. So anybody who's ever been by a oil and gas production facility knows there's an incredible amount of equipment on there. And I really can't, I'm not equipped with the data. I can get people who can give us this data. I'm not equipped to say whether that report that Mr. Wilson shared with regards to the extraction leaks is common or not common. I can certainly find that out for you. But what I will say is we hear these stats a lot about how many spills were reported in the state of Colorado over a certain period of time, or how many leaks were detected. And I think what I like to do is remind people that those are really great instances and evidence of our regulatory framework at work. So us being able to know and have that data really says that we are watching and we are reporting, and people know when this is occurring. And we take that data and we seek constant improvement on it. Again, whether that extraction data is an anomaly, whether it's something that we can look at the production across this entire state and say, is it a lot or is it not? That's something that I can certainly get that data for you. But again, I think I always want to encourage people to think about context and scale. We have a lot of active wells across this entire state, and we're doing a lot to ensure, because again, at least from Great Western's perspective, we are all Colorado. We are 150 people who raise our families here in the state of Colorado. We don't operate anywhere else. It's our backyard and it's our air too, and it's in our interest to really ensure that we're doing the right thing for our communities and for our families as well.
Other questions? Mr. Baker?
Did you say you have a third-party company doing this testing, or is it something you bought?
No, we are working with third-party independent companies to do these pilots for us. Okay. Yeah.
Mr. Bennett?
That was my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question. I appreciate what you guys do, because I do agree that Great Western or any oil and gas company is going to do their best to create a safe environment for their workers, and nobody wants to do harmful emissions. But I think one thing we're trying to figure out is there is an inherent danger. There are emissions, and what does that mean within our community and close to our houses? And that's what we have to figure out as a board, and then we have to figure out what to do about it. But I think I don't want to come off as I'm anti-industry.
Sure.
I'm not. It's certainly my duty, as I see it, is really what do we do within the town of Windsor? Because that's going to be different than if you're out in the middle of Weld County or some other rural type of area, because we are more populated.
Yep.
So
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that goes back to what I was talking about, our pilot programs being able to differentiate between what emissions might be being created on the location and what are coming off, because I think it's really important. You say it's your duty to the town, and I think it's our responsibility to you to be able to give you as clear of a picture of what's actually happening out there.
Because we do have to recognize emissions comes from a variety of sources,
Absolutely.
not just from a single industry.
Absolutely, yeah.
Especially in Colorado. We have numerous sources of where we have these.
Correct, yeah. So I mean, that's one of the things that I'm really excited about this technology, is being able to understand what that full picture really looks like, and if there's improvements to be made to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bennett?
Susan, if it's possible, I would like to know who the vendor is that you're using. Not tonight, but you
Sure.
can get that information to us, because I've had a couple recommendations from other communities. And again, this is new. Also, if it's possible to share the data that you're sharing with Adams County. It'd be
I will
helpful for us
check.
to see
Yeah.
what that looks like.
Yeah, I will check. I know we're looking at a couple different vendors, so what we can do immediately is share with you some websites to learn what does this technology look like and what are they promising to be able to do for
I would
us.
appreciate that.
And then what I'll do is we did have to kind of get a data approval to share that information
Right.
with Adams County, and we'll see if we can do the same, or at least give you a summary or an analysis of what we're finding.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you from the industry?
Hi, I am.
And you, okay, yes. I wanted to know.
Hi. Good evening, council members. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. My name is Kelly Cox. I work with Extraction Oil and Gas, and I'm the air quality coordinator, so I don't want to belabor a lot of what Susan said, but I have a lot of the same feelings that she does, and I just kind of wanted to come up and offer my expertise because I'm kind of going through some of the similar things that you are.
Oh.
And, you know, my company, trying to get out ahead of State Bill 181, has also begun testing some of these monitors out there. We've worked with Sean and the CDPHE and the Camel unit and the town of Windsor. And then, as you know, we also have operations in Broomfield. So Broomfield's also monitoring us under different kinds of ways. So there's lots of complications with that. The Camel obviously offers great data, but you know, you have to have a way to run it, and it's very expensive equipment. A lot of the different VOC sensors that you hear, or methane sensors, or I even hear other words, but you know, that technology can get quite cheap because you have to operate it via a solar panel. But you know, I think the thing we're all asking at the end of the day is, what is it really telling us? Where should we put these devices? Where does it make sense, you know? And sometimes, you know, I can also answer your questions about LDAR as we talk about all this different leak detection stuff, because continuous monitoring is really separate. And sometimes it might make sense to do continuous monitoring for different phases, where maybe for production it makes more sense to do more LDAR type work. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of offer my expertise and let you know that we're here. We also care very much about our environment and want to make the best decisions going forward for, you know, our town, for our state, for Windsor, everyone.
Okay, are there any questions for this party, Mr. Bennett?
Just a comment, as you're looking at what type of monitoring extraction might do, I would encourage you to also look at baseline before you begin operations.
Absolutely.
I think that's got advantages for citizens as well as the industry, so.
Yeah, it's very
yeah.
interesting.
How soon, do you have a timeline for your implementation?
We're implementing it
You're
now.
implementing it now. as
We're
we
installing
speak.
some of them
Okay.
now. Some
Do
of
we
them
have anything currently on site here
In Windsor?
that is being monitored?
Not in Windsor.
Okay.
That, like you heard, this stuff is very, I wouldn't even put it at commercial. So it's very hard to get the units, it's very hard to get them installed. Thinking about making them, you know, flexible, easy to transport, lightweight, you know. You obviously want to run them on a solar panel because you don't want to have to bring in a compressor to run an air monitor and things
Right.
like that, so.
Well, and I
just
don't
a
know
lot.
who in the industry or from our folks could answer, but does anybody know when when the suggested technology is going to be here at this place? I mean, are they saying has anybody seen a timeline or anything, or it's, no? Okay.
The improvement that I see tracks along with battery capabilities. So the more the batteries are able to store and solar panels are able to store power, the more refined and defined your sensors can become. And that's why we talk about things like methane or VOCs instead of VTEX or toluene, because those sensors get much more expensive.
Okay. So, Susan, I don't know, the equipment that you're investing in, are you assuming that's today's best on the market that you've been able to find?
I would think so, of the 2 or 3 vendors that we've.
Can you just come forward? I'm sorry. Just because there might be folks at home and they can't hear you if you're not on the microphone.
Yes, Mayor, I would say that of the 2 or 3 vendors that we've identified and the one that we've really chosen to run this initial pilot, we feel the most confident from a technological capability standpoint, from a meeting our needs, with regards to notification, setting alarm thresholds, that type of information, and just with our relationship with this company, I think we really are looking for the best-in-class solution. And again, happy to show you the technologies that we've vetted through, and then share at a later date who that vendor is that we're looking at, and hopefully we'll have a great success story to share.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, that we have that information. It would help us as we work through this process.
Okay.
And avoid us having to duplicate that effort
Yes.
if you've already gone through the exercise.
Yeah.
And we're going to be out there. We may not even encounter them either. I mean, I don't know how how on the market or open all these places are to find, so.
Yeah, at
if
this
you've already
time-
done some of the homework.
Yeah, these are much smaller scale type of solutions, obviously, because they're designed for a well pad, not an entire community. But again, we're happy to share that research from the like I said, the smarter people in the room than I, and get that data over to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like me to address the LDAR
Yeah, I would.
questions? So I think I've worked in air quality in the DJ for about 10 years, so I've done infrared camera work myself. And I just want to point out that many of those facilities, the hundreds of facilities that you mentioned, probably are getting inspected monthly. And the majority of leaks that we find in an infrared camera inspection are very, very tiny leaks. They're associated mostly with like an instrument gas line that you use to like supply gas things in your home. So it's like a loose connection that you just have to tighten. So those can add up very quickly. Like you mentioned, most of them are fixed as they find them.
Okay, Mr. Bennett, did you have something?
Since you brought that up, I had a conversation just recently with someone in the fire district in another community, and they were talking about, he was telling me about their infrared cameras.
Right.
Could you tell me a little bit more about how that works? And is it site specific or is it community? Just tell
You
me a little
mean
bit more
an
about it.
infrared camera itself?
Yeah.
So an infrared camera is a special kind of camera, even though it doesn't really
Right.
sound that special, but they're $100,000, so
Right,
there's
that's
got
what
to
I
be
was told.
something special about them. But
100K.
the reason that they can see gas or natural gas is because there's a germanium filter inside the infrared camera, which makes the infrared be able to detect at that wavelength which
Okay.
natural gas is present.
But can infrared distinguish between
Yeah.
gas versus?
Auto emission, like
Well, or just
myself.
versus
So that,
steam
the
versus
FLIR,
dust versus
Not steam.
anything else? I mean,
Steam
doesn't it all look the
particularly.
same under infrared?
I believe, and I know there are other experts in the room, but I believe steam can cause a problem with an infrared camera, but if otherwise, it's largely, if it's seeing gas and you know you're looking at a stream that has gas present in it, that's normally the key. So if you know what you're looking at has a stream of gas and what's coming out of it, you'll be able to see gas. But I think the thing that's confusing is that some people think that every infrared camera can detect gas, and that's not true. It has to have that germanium filter in it to be able to see gas.
Okay.
Another question about that. Is it the type of thing that can be mounted on a vehicle, pickup truck or something, and as it's driving around, it
You
can
know, I've
detect?
never heard of an infrared camera being mounted on a vehicle, but
Okay.
other
That's
devices
a lot.
for sure.
I've heard different things, that's why I'm asking if it's.
Sorry. So what, ask your question again, please.
I was told by one person that it can be mounted on the vehicle or something, and so as maybe driving through town or driving past an operation, you can detect something.
No, not really, because because of the pixelation of the camera.
Okay.
It just bouncing around on the vehicle makes it very
Okay.
difficult to detect gas unless it's a large amount of gas.
So you'd have to specifically go to a site to.
Correct.
use it?
There are some other, yeah, they're handheld. They do have fixed, you can fix a camera at a site. There's some technology out there where you can fix a camera at a site and it looks at one place and then it looks at another and then it looks at another. And with the pixelation, it will give you an alarm. For driving surveys, there's some other vehicles out there, mobile monitoring that actually you can drive along and it has, looks like funnels on the front of it and it draws in air and can detect methane.
Okay, because one of the interesting is you know, all these technologies, I'm also thinking about the personnel and ongoing operational costs and beyond the initial cost of something. So that's why I'm asking.
So
this.
that vehicle I just explained,
Yeah.
I just mentioned, that can drive along and detect methane, they're about $500,000, somewhere in the neighborhood.
I don't like that
Just
answer.
for the vehicle.
I don't like that answer.
Sorry. There
No,
are other
the cameras
technologies.
are about 100,000 is what I've heard. But what I understand is it would be site-specific and, you know, we would maybe have it at one location for a while and something.
Well, and I was going to mention, there are some other technologies out there with lasers that they can mount them on aircraft. So there's laser detection with aircraft. And you can mount these on vehicles as well.
And doesn't Colorado just naturally have a high level of methane anyway?
So there are places in the state of Colorado where methane naturally seeps out of the ground. Any place that you have feedlots, swamps, naturally degrading material, you're going to have some methane. I'm not going to say that they have any more than any other state. We did some driving surveys in the town of Florence. I don't know if you're familiar with Florence down near Canyon City. We found many, many methane seeps.
Is it safe to say that in the town of Windsor, that oil and gas industry is a large contributor to our methane?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
I agree it comes from many sources, but.
Well, I do understand. I mean, I'm not saying they are or they're not. I just don't have the data.
There's a multitude of sources. It doesn't come from one source. Okay. Any additional questions? Okay. Mr. Hale, where do we go from here?
Well, Your Honor, it's really up to the board. I mean, I think there could be a board discussion. Obviously, the big discussion tonight has been on air quality. I think that's kind of the biggest preface discussion for the board to have. So I would think the board has a discussion and then you give staff direction. Do you want more information? Do you want to hear from somebody else? Do you want to see a draft ordinance? You know.
Okay. Well, first of all, and then Mr. Baker, but I think we do need some more information. I thought at least by tonight, maybe it's too soon, obviously. But I think if we go down some kind of path for some kind of self-monitoring, we need to see like what those options are, who has what, cost ranges, what is or if the best technology, and get a number of sources so we can start compiling that kind of information. Mr. Baker?
Yeah, our memo had 4 kind of bullet points that we would potentially, or we previously discussed, so I kind of have notes on each of those. But for the air quality, I think we should put something in the capital improvement budget. I don't know that we'll have a decision by August whenever we discuss the capital budget, but I think we should put money in there for next year or going forward. So if we determine that we need or want air quality testing, we have the money in the budget. So that would be one point I'd make on that. We also, I keep going, there was a bullet about site location, and we've talked for 7.5 years that it's always been state regulated and we have no local control. I feel like we finally have a little local control, or maybe a lot. And I wonder, and it's probably a bigger discussion than tonight, but if these facilities, I think they're industrial, and I'm not sure they should be in our residential zones. I kind of think it should be an industrial zone function. So that's what I think on the site location. And then there is reclamation. I think I brought that up at our last meeting. And my follow-up would be who's responsible for it? I think the company is. How long does it take before we get to reclaiming the land? Is it 20 or 30 or 40 years? And is there a system in place within the town? And if not, there probably should be. I'll probably be gone, but there should be something in place to make sure that land is reclaimed.
Well, so before you go on to your next point,
Okay.
Can you tell us what the current policy is for reclamation?
Sure.
I'm sure there is one already. in
Yeah, it's
place.
not policy, it's in rule.
Or a rule.
The site has to be restored to 80% of original disturbance. Okay? So they have to have what we call a reference area. So they have to take reference area pictures, and it has to meet 80% of that reference area. So if it was an alfalfa field, it has to be 80% covered in alfalfa to be released from COGCC. We have 5 specialized reclamation specialists. One of them actually lives in Greeley. They go out and do, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, not a joke, but they do point transects where they actually go out and they count on the ground how many plants are there, how many of those are weeds, how much bare ground there is, and it has to meet that 80% threshold. And the operator is under, yes, the operator is under the requirement to reclaim that. There's no set time limit. If they don't get it the first year, They got to work on it. They got to keep working on it until they get it right. The only other caveat to that is if the operator did default and leave the state, then the state of Colorado, the COGCC, has a fund that would take care of that reclamation.
But the state has someone that's following up. They know when the well is plugged. And
Yes, so the operator has to give us notice of when the well is plugged. They have to give us an intent to plug. And then when they say it's ready for final inspection, they're required to send in a sundry saying they've begun final reclamation. And then when they feel that the final reclamation's done, they're required to send in a sundry stating that as well.
And there's no timetable to finish that?
What we usually require, or what we usually allow, is 2 years. We do have a rule that says we have to wait 2 years to make sure there's any subsidence. There's no subsidence, correct? Mostly that was for farm ground, but we do see it in the residential areas as well. If the land use changes, that may change the timing on the reclamation. So if it was farm ground and now it's going to be a subdivision, and the initial grading and everything's been done for the subdivision, then that reclamation period may be waived.
Do you have inspectors for plugged wells?
Yes. Our normal inspection team, the field inspection unit, I'm going to get this wrong, 35 is going to be 35 people. They're putting on some more inspectors. 3 of those are kind of supervisor. There's a manager, quality assurance professional, and a reclamation supervisor that don't do a lot of inspections. But everybody else does some type of inspection. So we have inspectors that are watching the pluggings to make sure they're being done right. We have inspectors that are going to drilling sites, production sites, all phases of it. And then we have 5 specialized people. And actually, we're approved for 3 more FTE in that group to do reclamation.
And would a plugged well get continuous inspection every 4 or 5 years? Or?
No. So once it's plugged, like I said, we'd give it 2 years, and then it would be flagged for an inspection. And the reclamation inspector would go out, potentially go out sooner than that, but go out after that 2 years and see how the reclamation was evolving. If it's not on track, then corrective actions are sent to the operator to continue on that reclamation.
Thank you.
Do you know how many plugged wells we currently have in the state?
So the current active well count is 52,000. The total number of drilled wells in the state is somewhere near 110,000. That's statewide. And actually last year they plugged 1,000 more wells than they drilled. So if you look at the records, there was 53,000 active wells last year, and now there's 52.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Carter.
Mike, I assume there is security required of the operator to assure completion, reclamation, all that stuff, right?
Correct. Each operator has to post financial assurance. And currently, that's one of our rulemakings, because the financial assurance isn't adequate. They can have blanket bonds. We do have other things in place. For instance, if an operator has more inactive wells than they have active wells, they have to bond those wells individually. So there is different bonding, or I shouldn't say bonding because bond's not the proper term. It's financial assurance.
And the rulemaking that you're about to go through, are you addressing the amount of financial assurance, or is that just
Yeah, there'll be, so last year, an executive order under Governor Hickenlooper's administration required us to go through a work group on financial assurance. And I can't remember the exact date that report came out, but they listed several alternatives, you know, whether it's an individual bond for the well or whether it's a sliding something. There was some stuff that came out of that I'm sure that'll be rolled into it. And we're also looking at how other states do it. This is, not to make this sound good or bad, almost every other oil and gas producing state in the nation's having the same problem. And some are much worse than ours. At last count, I think, well, Texas quit counting. And Kansas had something like 18,000 orphaned wells.
Yeah.
Before you move on to your point 4, can we go back to, I just want to ask something about site location. So in terms of site location, and I know we're all new into this, so I don't know if it's yet to be demonstrated, but let's say there's a request from the community for an operator to move something. Is Senate Bill 181, does that supersede the operator or the mineral owner's rights, constitutional right? If they, for whatever reason, are not able to relocate
So that's
the wellhead.
That's a really good question. The way that I interpret Senate Bill 181, that's where the alternative site analysis falls in. And if the local government doesn't agree with the operator or the operator doesn't agree with the local government, that's where the technical review board at COGCC falls in. And those people will look at various things. Is geologically, is this the best way to drain those minerals? We just don't know where that's going to end up. You know, there may be competing locations with competing operators. It may get very difficult in the drilling and spacing units because they also have to have local disposition in that. What's the best way to do this? And that will all have to be looked at by the technical review.
And is the board set up, or how soon will that board be set up?
That was in the November rulemaking.
Okay.
So alternative site analysis and technical review board, is my understanding, is the first two on our schedule.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Baker, do you want to proceed with your number 4?
Sure. 2 more points.
Sorry.
I think we should charge, or at least look into, an oil and gas impact fee. We charge every new household that's built in Windsor numerous impact fees, road, etc. And I think we should look at an oil and gas impact fee when they drill a new well in Windsor. And lastly, the Larimer County has a citizens board. They're looking at making their rules. I don't know if that's something that we would want to consider some sort of committee. I know we have, I'm sure there's lots of people that work in the industry in our town and a lot of environmentally conscious people in our town. So I think we'd have a pretty diverse group that could help us along in this process. So that's something I threw out there.
Okay.
That's all I had.
Hey, Mayor, I'm sorry, when I was going around, I did want to mention too, I think specifically because we had that fire last week at Great Western, and I know the board was really concerned for public safety, and I had some response questions as well. So the fire department is here, Chief Kazian,
Sure.
and I didn't know if you just wanted to hear from
Yeah,
him, and just kind
absolutely.
of walk you through that.
Absolutely.
Good evening, Madam
Good
Mayor,
evening.
Board. Chris Kazian, Fire Chief of Windsor Severance Fire Rescue. With me is our Fire Marshal, Sandra Friedrichsen, and Inspector Morgan Matthew. We hired Morgan Matthew specifically for her oil and gas background. She's a geologist by nature. One of her primary functions is to help us deal with all hazmat permitting, and oil and gas being one of them. Not sure if your specific question is what happened the other night or what we're doing in a response-capable way. I'd like to just clarify before I go on.
Right, I think the questions that I had were just, you know, obviously the board, the town was concerned for public safety, and just wanted to know, you know, what protocols you have in place. Do you test? Do we know if we have a leak? How do we go through?
Perfect. So while we do quite a bit of training with oil and gas, we have hazmat techs and firefighters that are trained to be able to identify the hazards just as part of our normal course of training. We certainly have the tools and equipment, the monitoring. We do not have the fancy camera that does the $100,000 camera. We don't have one of those, but we do have air monitoring, and so just the same type of devices that the oil and gas folks that are wearing while they're on site, we have 2 of those specifically to monitor air while we're working in that environment. If an incident is to occur in our community and we are dispatched, so we had lots of discussion tonight about monitoring and notifications and stuff, so I'm not going to really speak to that because at this point it's not set up to make any notifications to us in any capacity, but if there ever is and we're notified, we would respond and be the primary response agency most typically alongside the operator to try to see what's going on and mitigate that problem on a more local basis and immediate need. So when we are identified or notified there's a problem, we're going to go out, we'll get dispatched, and typically we're being called by either, typically the operator would call, so we've got an incident on site, we need some assistance, is our typical type of response. So we're prepared to handle that. As it relates to, the other evening when we had an actual incident, a fire on an operator site, our crews arrived on scene, obviously identified we had a fire. We began to do our 360, which is our size up of the incident. Part of that, of course, includes air monitoring as one of our high priorities. The other is to measure the tank. So we do have another type of camera that can sense heat. And we're then monitoring the temperatures in the tanks and identifying different temperatures, and if one is starting to get hotter than the other, and what levels we need to take different actions, evacuations, things like that. We did receive a question that evening about, is the community in danger? Our answer to that is immediately in this area right here, we were monitoring there, and there weren't not any levels of high dangerous chemicals that were concerning to us, and we would believe that anyone else in the community was in danger given that incident at that particular time. The operator, those are the experts in the field, the subject matter experts. We're worried about the VOCs, the methane, all those type of things. We're worried about all that. We work with them on scene, and I can tell you the other night that I was fairly comfortable leaving the scene about midnight that night, that everything was mitigated to the best of our ability. There was nobody in the immediate area that was in hazard or jeopardy, nor the community at large. And that's our training in a nutshell, if you will, and I didn't go into detail of all we do, but I hope that helps you at least to understand the comfortability of Windsor Severance Fire Rescue, given our footprint and what we're responding to. We certainly know 18 months ago or so, we had a large fire and a large event. We responded to that and mitigated that to the best of our ability. And so that's where we kind of stand in, as the fire chief, making sure we're ready and prepared.
What percent of your calls are these are made up of these kinds of
Well, we run about 3,600 calls a year, and I would say like
less than
3.
10%?
I don't know, I'm making up a number. I mean, it's very, very small. So it's very small. We
So
maybe
you're
I
not
don't know.
having a lot of incidences currently?
We are not having a lot of incidents. That doesn't mean that incidents don't occur. There's incidents that occur that we don't get dispatched to, that back to Mr. Wilson's statistics there on spills and the reporting, they're very good and mandated to report. So we do get notifications at times there was an incident that may or may not have required our response. But for the most part, when an incident occurs and they need our help, the operators kind of want us there we bring the fire trucks and all those other things that they're really interested in us having.
Okay.
Mr.
Baker? Mr. Baker had a question.
So we were probably, I hate to say the word lucky or fortunate that happened in an industrial area. What is your evacuation distance if that were to happen, or anywhere, closer to homes? Do you have we need to evacuate this big of an area?
So again, we're looking at each site individually. We're looking at what we're actually faced with as it relates to quantities, what's in the area, all those type of things. So they're all going to be based upon different evacuation, different distances and what you need to do based upon the actual incident. Again, we're getting information from the operators on site. We're getting information from the actual site itself to know what is actually on that site, what state of production they're in, what's happening. Each of those create different challenges. And we're going to work at that and work with our hazmat techs to make those ultimate decisions.
You guys make that decision?
We ultimately would make that decision, but with the help of again, the operator, or in the absence of an operator on site, we have some standard tables and things we would use, and always erring on the side of caution based again upon what we're seeing and what the dangers are of that specific incident at that specific moment.
Do you have a minimum?
The fire chief, and I'm not the hazmat tech, so I rely on the experts in the field.
I know
I'll look back real quick and see if either one has a exact, we're probably.
You said you had a chart, so I thought, well, at least there's got to be a minimum of 200 feet or something.
Yeah, it's all going to depend on what we see and how it's operating, and the comfortability of each incident is going to be slightly different.
Okay, thank you.
I think you guys do a great job, and you came to a work session a while back and talked a little bit about this, responding to oil and gas, and so I would never question what you guys had done. I think as a town board member, some people don't realize the separation that we have between fire and rescue in the town. And then I think what happened here is just communication, because start hitting the evening news, saying 40 firefighters, fatality, of course, a very serious thing. And so I think people sometimes come to us thinking we're going to know exactly what's going on. And so that's where we rely on you to communicate. And I know you're in close contact with our town manager and our chief of police, so I appreciate that.
Certainly do our best, and in the moment of mitigating those incidents and trying to make sure we track, there's chains of commands. Hopefully all of us get the message back, and, we're certainly working hard to try to communicate as best as possible. Absolutely, I can assure you if there were any incidents or issues as it relates to evacuation, needing to make notification, utilizing all the resources that we have, we would be engaging with all of our Weld County Sheriff. In this case is where we worked, but Windsor PD was on scene to double check, make sure that the town was safe and that they didn't need anything or do anything on our front as well. So we did have communication. My apologies if we didn't get it all the way up to you folks.
No, I think you did just fine. You have to go in, you have to assess the situation, and you have to do your due diligence. But we also don't want to unnecessarily spread fear amongst our folks until we know exactly what the story is. I mean, as it was, there were some folks speculating that there were some things that happened that were going on that were not indeed happening. So I think it's important that when we get information out, that we need to make sure we have accurate, good, true information that goes out to our residents. And sometimes that has to take some time because you don't know until you get there and are able to get on the scene and go through the process. And so nothing is better than good, accurate information that we need to report out to our citizens. We don't need to unnecessarily, scare or spread fear amongst the entire community unnecessarily. Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, a couple of things. I absolutely support the idea of further investigation of air monitoring equipment and maybe cameras, whatever technology that could give us an early warning system. So that's good, and I appreciate the idea too of maybe starting to look at some money in the capital improvement plan, so if we wanted to do something, to be ready to do that. The site thing really bothers me. A couple years ago, the legislation that failed on automatic 2,500 feet setback, in my view, is ridiculous. 500 feet is also ridiculous. And I don't have scientific evidence to back it up. I have anecdotal, even from an executive of a Colorado oil and gas company who said no way would he want an operation 500 feet from his house. So I think that's a topic we haven't really talked about. And I'm not exactly certain where to go with that. A question I have regarding 2 weeks ago, the venting that took place. I don't know how to ask this appropriately. There's a gas being vented. How far was the plume? And you may not know, I think it's maybe staff or the industry.
On our specific incident last Wednesday?
The venting that took place at Great Western, week before last, right?
I'm not certain on that one myself.
You may not know.
No, I don't know that.
But my question would be, how far I'm going to call it a plume. If I'm 10 feet away, would I smell those gases? If I was a mile away, would I smell them? And where I'm going with that is, what is a safe distance? And I don't have the answers for that. So that's the question I'm actually giving the staff, not to you so much. That's on the side, yes.
Well, we have him here. Do you have any questions for him? It
I
sounds
don't
like,
have-
it
I
sounds
don't
like you're,
no.
I mean, so let's,
I don't
do
for
we have
you.
any questions for the fire chief? And
Yeah,
then,
go
and then
ahead.
I'm sorry to
No,
cut you off,
that's
but I
okay.
thought
No,
you were going to,
appreciate-
since
no,
we
I'm
had
sorry.
him at the podium.
I'm sorry.
So Mr. Redemeyer, do you have questions for our fire
Hey,
chief?
Dan, when you guys showed up on the scene last Wednesday, you guys are continuously monitoring the whole time you're on the scene, I'm assuming somebody's dedicated to, measuring that. What were the levels? What are you testing for when you're on site? I mean, obviously you're close to the active fire until it's extinguished. I'm just curious, that's part of what we're dealing with is how to test, what we're testing, what are the safe levels.
So we're looking for the different gases that are out there, and so we have a specific monitor we brought with us as a sample today. Again, it's the same what the industry uses. So we're looking for HS2 gases. We're looking for any flammable gases that are going to be of concern for us. And we have a 5-gas monitor that can look for other different options. But this is what they wear. We clip it right on our clothing, and we're monitoring that in and around the area, downstream, downwind. And really looking to see what that is. And when this thing starts to beep, we know that it's at a level that's of, what do we have to do kind of question. And we're going to evaluate each of those as we need to. And so given the different dynamics of each situation, again, it might be we're back a half a mile, it might be we're back 20 feet. We were, that afternoon or that evening at 6:30, when we got there, we had a fire on top of the tank. Our crews, once they looked at the tanks and saw the tank temperatures, climbed actually up on the catwalk to determine what's on fire, where it's coming from, so we could create a plan of attack. So we had 2 or 3 firefighters up on top of the tank evaluating that. And through our training, through the tools and equipment we have, felt safe and comfortable in making that aggressive of a move, if you will, given the dynamics of this fire. In another fire, we might have been standing at the road with a pair of binoculars and saying, what do we do now? Each of those is going to be done differently.
Okay.
And I want to come back to Mr. Bennett's question when I get done, but I just want to follow up on yours. Anything else, sir?
No. I'm glad to see what you guys wear and how you do it and stuff. I just didn't. So every firefighter that's on the scene is wearing one of those, or just the ones that are close enough?
Yeah, we own 2 of these, and so we have 2 of these in our possession, and then we have other gas monitors, but these are specific to gas and oil sites and the sensors that are in this monitor. But I do want to come back and just mention to Mr. Bennett about site, about locations. Again, we don't dictate, monitor those, legislate those, but what we do is we do inspect and follow the process. And again, why we brought Morgan on board is her experience in the oil and gas industry and her understanding and our ability to, again, continue to maintain another level of safety and expertise that we did not have 4 months ago before we hired her. So in the last year or so, we had this identified as a need. We've put forth the effort, given our footprint on oil and gas, the safety and commitment to our fire district, which includes and encompasses the entire town of Windsor. And so that's our commitment as a fire district, to do everything we can to make it as safe as possible from a fire district standpoint, and do what we can do to influence the safety of each and every operator on site. I just want to say we have a very good relationship working with the operators. They have, as a few said tonight, they have just as much a vested interest in a safe environment for them. Many of them live in this community and others where they operate. And I just have to say that we're doing the same thing for us. I want to make sure my family's safe, just like everyone that's my neighbor and my friend and coworkers. So we're just as committed.
Okay. Are there any additional questions for the fire chief or around that topic?
Thank you very much, Madam
Is there anything
Mayor.
else further you wanted to share?
I don't. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, now Mr. Bennett.
I just had one other thing, the air monitoring, we need some more research and do something with that. Site, I got questions, we need some information on what's an appropriate site. Our CUG process, I've looked at that and I've compared it to other communities, and I would like to have us have a work session and delve into our CUG a little bit deeper. I got some questions about, and I hate the cliches, but the idea of trust but verify. How do we, we require certain things, but how do we know that's really happening? And I think there's maybe some areas in the CUGs that we might want to review and maybe beef up a little bit. And
Would you
then
want to have that conversation with the planning commission?
whoever's
perhaps?
appropriate, yeah, whatever wise minds we can get together, let's take a look at that. And there was one other thing, kind of relates back to some of the risk management, fines, impact fees. What happens if the industry violates our CUG? We can fine, but we don't have a mechanism for doing that, I don't think. So I think we ought to have a conversation about what is that, and do we want to get into that business at all, and how do we do it?
Okay. So I heard a suggestion that maybe we have a follow-up work session.
I think we need it.
With CUG, to look at the CUG process. I don't know, depending on when we can, probably with the planning commission. I don't know, probably depending on when we would have that. I don't know if you'd be ready to maybe provide some additional information based on some of this air monitoring information or data.
Right, Mayor. I think the month of August, well, I know the month of August, our work sessions are full.
Right.
We start to have some availability after Labor Day. And so I would think early to mid-September, we should, staff could probably get ready and bring some information back for self-monitoring. And I understand you want to look at different technology and equipment. I understand that if we understand maybe how much other municipalities have spent on this equipment, we could at least have a budget number to put in the CIP.
Right.
Right now for kind of a non-specific, similar like we did to reimburse CDOT or to match them. Maybe if we just have a number that we put in there that we don't know specifically what it's for. And then, I think we could have that kind of self-monitoring, what that program would look like. We could give you a little background on what other municipalities are doing, the equipment, the third parties that are out there. You know, it'd even be nice if we could hear from a third-party vendor that does this work, what they do. And
Yeah.
so I think we could do that in September.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm seeing that as a different meeting than the CUG process, right? These are probably for
I
the start.
think so, because I think we'll have enough probably just to go through the CUG, plus if we have the planning commission. We don't want to have these meetings like for 5 hours and have, I think we want to do our due diligence, and if we want to go through this process, we want to make sure we get it right for all sides of the story, right? And so to do that, I think we, instead of doing multitude of different topics, we ought to break it down into topic matters so that we can dive into those the best way that we can. Mr. Bennett?
You said almost exactly what I was going to say. You know my impatience, but I think there's enough complexity and questions that I'm comfortable with the staff telling us when you're ready for us to talk about it.
Okay, but I understand
So
the
you have
timeline is,
permission.
I think that.
We don't want to
we don't wanna-
prematurely
right,
have a
exactly.
conversation if we don't
Right.
have the information at
Right.
hand, and
Right.
if we don't have the right data or the right
Right,
people. I also know that when we had our breakfast with Weld County Commissioners, they alluded that they have initiated a process. That process started today, and they alluded to there may be some things in that process that we could, and I think we owe ourselves to look at what their additional processes are too, because the more that we can glean from other entities, because we don't simply have the means or the staff or the wherewithal, which is part of I think the heartburn that the smaller communities had with Senate Bill 181, that they make us now all individually have to dive into this. But if we can maybe work together with other localities, and we already know because they told us that they have something, and some rulemakings, a very large document actually, that we should probably even spend some time taking a look at what does theirs say? And do we draw anything from what they have into ours, or do we just, maybe allude to that, maybe make that becomes our standard? I don't know, because we haven't studied that yet, so that's another work session, perhaps.
Okay.
Mayor, I
Dr.
just want to
Jones?
say I agree with you and Mr. Bennett that I think the idea of this work session was to, while the state's doing their rulemaking, we're going to get into our rulemaking as well, and kind of in conjunction. And I think, for instance, if we want to control the siting, I mean, that would probably be part of the CUG I think, Ian, do you think that's correct?
That would be the place to handle it.
Right, and if we're going to talk about that, CUGs, I think we're going to have to revisit the land use map, which has to involve the planning commission as well. So, yeah, I think the sooner we get going on this, the better. And lastly, I want to thank the members of the state representatives, the industry representatives, the citizens here who are obviously very interested in this topic. I think it's been a very enlightening work session for me anyway.
Any further? Mr. Sosowski?
Well, I guess I have to be the outlier, and you all knew this was coming, right? I just feel like this is absolutely excellent information. Thank you for the input and feedback. I feel, however, that it's a bit premature. I'd hate to have us go down the road of adopting programs and adopting rules, and at some expense, going into air monitoring, et cetera, when in fact the Air Quality Control Commission, who has not yet established the rules under the new guidelines, may come out with exactly what it is that we decided should be done, or something that's different from what we thought should be done. We don't know yet. We don't know what the revised guidelines for the Air Quality Control Commission. Even more importantly, the COGCC has an entirely different new mission. They have to, as was pointed out by Mr. Leonard, reevaluate every one of their rules with a new standard of preserving public health and welfare and environment and wildlife. I mean, they have to look hard at all of these things. We don't know where this is going to come out. And to my feeling, and you know I've said this before, you can read through the qualifications of the commission, members of the Air Quality Control Commission, and it would just make you pale in terms of their years of experience and their level of education specific to this field. I think we kid ourselves if we think we can hire a consultant and in a 2-hour conversation, come up with a better plan than they're going to come up with when they go through their rulemaking process. Not to mention which, their rulemaking process at the state level is 1,000 times more detailed, more rigorous than anything we could do. They're going to hear from both sides of the industry, opponents, proponents, et cetera. They're going to gather data, analyze data, and they're going to make a set of rules in keeping with their mission. I feel like, and we may have a role to play, we may have a place where we feel like we want to modify, but we don't know yet what they're even going to come up with. And I'd hate to have us spend money on something only to find that we are being redundant with what the Air Quality Control Commission is going to require a year from now, or going down the wrong path in terms of their goal and their mission. I think the hardest part for these statewide agencies who have this mission and will take it very seriously is what are they going to do when every other locality does something different? And you have to look at them and say, what, did they think we didn't do our jobs? So I would want to only caution us, and while this is a very serious issue, there are mechanisms under 181 for very robust rulemaking by very intelligent people, and I think we ought to wait for that to conclude.
When do we know that we might see that?
Oh, no, it won't be for...
It's like 18 months?
Right, sure. It'll be a while.
I mean, it's a while. It's a ways away.
It'll be a
But
while.
are they going to bring out the rules as they make them? Is that what I heard you say
Yes, that is
tonight,
what he
Mr.
said.
Leonard? It's not like we wait at the very end of 18 months to get all the pieces. Did I hear you say tonight?
That's correct. And there's 4 specific, the 4 rulemakings that I mentioned, the flow lines, the alternative site analysis, the wellbore integrity, the cumulative impacts, and the mission change all have to be done, or SB 181 mandated, those are all done before July 1st, 2020.
Okay.
And then there'll be other rulemakings. We foresee at least a year and a half, maybe 2 years of total rulemaking.
Okay.
Right, well, you know that's the position that I have fairly consistently taken. And quite frankly, even on the citing, I think the 181 provides for COGCC to lend advice and information regarding citing, and they do that by forming a technical advisory committee with experts in land use planning, oil and gas exploration, public health, environmental sciences, and the other relevant disciplines. Why not tap that resource? Why not? It would be free for the town in a siting analysis to go to the state and say, hey, give us a hand with all of your expertise. And not only that, their expertise is garnered by looking at 100,000 wells throughout the state over the years. So I don't know. I feel like we have the authority, and maybe wisdom is when you have the authority but choose not to exercise it.
I would concur with your sentiment, and I do think that we need to, proceed somewhat cautiously and make sure. But I still think at the same time, in order to, I guess, make sure that folks understand that we are doing our due diligence, that we continue to have at least our work sessions and move ourselves, and maybe not make any concrete decisions at this point, or at least if we do, know that we may have to change, but I think you do bring up some good points.
Thank you.
I personally have no problem making concrete decisions and moving forward. And I look forward to the discussion.
Anything else? Okay. If there is nothing else, then this work session is now concluded, and so we are adjourned.
So,